No, no, this doesn't have to do with your preference.
Oh, okay.
You know, the straight man, so I get to bounce stuff and joke off of you.
Okay, yeah. I'm very serious. Yes.
But we've got another goofball in the room, and that's Huffington Post's Lee Speigel.
No, wait. If Martin is the straight man, I'm the goofball?
So if this were the Three Stooges, I don't know. Three Stooges really didn't have a straight man, did they?
No, because they were all goofballs.
Mo was trying to be, but, you know.
Yeah, so I don't know. We're all a bunch of goofballs, actually.
Well, it's nice to be here with both of you.
Yeah, good to have you on the show. This is always fun. You know, in the past, of course, we had Jason McClellan with us. And I think I'll refer to at least maybe a couple of his stories because he was writing for us, you know, the first quarter or so of the year.
Yeah.
And then doing these. So now we have Martin, and it's going to be fun because, you know, Martin, there are some of these stories, at least towards the beginning of the year, you and I weren't doing the show together, so I don't know your opinions on them. So it's going to be, or even if you know the story, so it's going to be really fun to do this.
Well, I've been digging back through and from January on and looking at all the different cases. It's been real interesting, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing when you look back on the year and see how many stories there are, and even some that you forget about. There's some I've forgotten about.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for me, when I was looking back, I came up with about 50 stories that I had to whittle down to about 10 or 15 for my HuffPost piece, and I realized this past year it ran the whole gamut of serious stuff and very, very funny stuff.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny when I was putting this together because you just talked about 50 that you whittled down to 15.
Yeah.
Martin texted me earlier. He's like, I'm going to have 3 on hand, but I might have 4 and an extra. Would that be all right? And I was like, sure, because I'm only going to have about 15 myself.
Well, I'll listen most of the night if that's the case.
Well, what's funny is that, you don't listen. We'll hear your response on what you think of the story.
Yeah, sure.
But what's funny is even though we have these long lists, we only get to about 3 or 4 each anyway. So
right, yeah.
But we'll cheat a little along the way. Of course, you know, you guys know I like to cheat when it comes to the way we do the stories or whatever. But let's start off though with the current news, and I don't know if Martin, you prepared a news story for recent news.
No, I didn't actually. I didn't know we were going to do that.
You didn't know? That's the way the show. That's what we do every week.
I've never done a year in review show.
That's okay. We'll wing it. And actually, the biggest news story for today, Lee Speigel wrote, or actually I wrote a version of it, but I used some of what Lee wrote. So
can I guess? Hillary Clinton?
Oh, geez, you're so good.
Ah, phew.
So maybe, Lee, if you wouldn't mind kind of summarizing this story for us.
Well, it kind of goes back to last Tuesday. Hillary was on part of another campaign trip to New Hampshire, my home state, and she first made a stop in Portsmouth where she attended a couple of town halls. Then she went up to Conway, which is up near the White Mountains, where I went to college. And so I know the area really well. And she went to a newspaper up there, a small newspaper called the Conway Daily Sun. And what was going on there was she attended an editorial meeting there in which she talked about her foreign policy and the economy. And when that was all over, as she was getting ready to leave, one of the newspaper's reporters, a guy named Damon Steer, went up to Secretary of State Clinton and reminded her that he had previously talked to her in 2007 when she was first running for president. He had talked with her about UFOs. And her response was basically, yes, you know, I remember, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. And that's what started this whole thing off.
Mm-hmm. So pretty interesting. And then you were able to talk to him, and you asked, I think, which was the most pertinent question. was she serious about it?
Yeah, I sent him an email, and he wrote back to me, and then he contacted me twice today, just out of the blue, because he wanted to continue our conversation. He said that he thought that it was because he was involved with the conversation. It was very lighthearted between him and Hillary, and he felt that initially she was just having fun with the whole thing. But then he also said to me that given her relationship with John Podesta, who is the chairman of her campaign, and with her husband's track record, husband being former President Bill Clinton, of course, Damon felt that she might be sincere about moving forward with UFO disclosure. And interesting, I got one of the emails that I got from Damon today. He said, boy, this story has really gotten around, but he says it seemed kind of funny that no one else has asked her about it in New Hampshire, where it all started. And
Yeah.
and he wondered, he asked me if I thought that the campaign might have realized that they had to address this sooner than later. And he also thinks that what's really interesting, and I agree, is that so far the Republicans should be all over this. I mean, I've been waiting patiently for the last couple of days to see how is Donald Trump going to respond to this, because he'll basically try and take her down any way he can. Here's the perfect opportunity for him, and we haven't heard a peep from any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Strange.
Go ahead.
One comment I'd like to make about whether he was thinking if she was serious or not. When you make a statement like that, even if you're joking, that can be taken out of context so easily.
Sure.
So I'm sure that she's guarded in whatever she is saying, whether it's a joke or not, really.
Well, my take on that is I don't care because
Well,
no, I really don't. Because think about this. No other, until this story came out, no other presidential candidate even mentioned or breathed the word UFO or Area 51. Hillary's the first. Okay, that's the first thing. In whatever context she made those statements in the story, when you look back in 2014 when her husband was on Jimmy Kimmel, and then last year when Barack Obama was on Jimmy Kimmel, all they did was joke about it, from the beginning of their little interviews to the end, and they were totally lighthearted about it. And both of those interviews and stories immediately went viral. So everybody knew that both presidents had just done or said anything about UFOs. And that's the point. It's like maybe they inadvertently knew or deliberately knew that anything they could say about UFOs was going to get out there and the public would hear it. And maybe that's what Hillary did. So it doesn't matter what the context was. The fact that now everybody knows about it, as I was saying to a couple of my co-workers at HuffPost today, it's not just a UFO story, it's a news story. And that's the difference.
I totally disagree with you on whether that the context is not important. To me, that's everything. And to me, just like we don't know necessarily about Obama's thoughts, we don't know her thoughts, I don't think. And that's the difference between what she said, at which we should get into more detail, and what Clinton versus Obama said. Clinton actually got into some context. He talked about how he did have an interest in UFOs and how he did try to look into it, and that he couldn't find anything. Whereas Obama completely made fun of it with some real over-the-top comments that were funny. And I think that with Hillary, she tried to do what Obama did, but she's just not cool and funny. She just doesn't have that, social prowess that Clinton has. So when she tries to do it, it just comes off as awkward, because she made a couple other very strange comments, right?
Well, yeah. I'm not saying that she wasn't serious about it. I think that before she went up to New Hampshire, she probably didn't know that anybody was going to ask her about UFOs. But I'm pretty sure that ever since John Podesta came on as her campaign manager, you know they've had some conversations about this just because of his background. I mean, any of us who do research or who've looked into UFOs in general, we all know that there's this amazing connection between both Clintons and John Podesta. There's a history there of the three of them having an interest in UFOs, and so you know that Podesta has been talking to Hillary. She even admits that to the reporter from New Hampshire. She said,
"Well, and that's what I mean. Get into her other comments."
Yeah.
Regardless of that, they know. But I mean, what I'm saying is that we still don't know her thoughts, and that's what would be great about the comments. We know she knew the question would come.
Eventually, yeah.
But her statements are that aliens are probably here. She said something like that. She said that maybe we'll put a task force to go check out Area 51.
Right.
Was another one of her comments, and that, John Podesta is really into this UFOs, and he made me promise that we'll look for the answers.
Right.
So, especially the aliens are here, the Area 51 task force. I mean, those, I think she was trying to be funny, but they came off of weird. But she wasn't trying to give us any insider information or any insight into her thoughts on the topic.
You know, I think what will probably happen, and I could be totally wrong because I don't really know 100% if I'm correct, if Hillary is actually elected as president, I believe, as with all presidents, they get debriefed. Who debriefs them, I don't know. But I believe that she would be debriefed on the really important things that are going on in this country that any president should possibly or potentially could talk about or bring to the public's attention. I just personally feel that someone would basically strongly suggest to her that she doesn't pursue this. That's just my gut feeling.
That's a good point, and it's something interesting to bring up. And I'd love to hear, what do you think, Martin? Do you think presidents are debriefed on UFOs and told not to talk about them?
I don't know if they're actually debriefed on UFOs. I think, the way the government always seems to work is a need-to-know type of situation. But I totally agree with what Lee just said. I think that if she touched on the topic, that she would probably be told to steer away from it because she doesn't need to know type of thing.
That's interesting because I disagree with that. I'm skeptical of that. I don't think that that they would share with her that I don't think they would talk to her about what to say about it at all. I don't think they talked to Obama or Clinton about what to say about this topic at all. I don't think they allude to knowing anything about the topic. There's absolutely no indication nor any case that really grabs the public or the military's attention that we've seen where it would be like they would have to talk to a president about it. I just get the feeling that even if there is something out there, that they're left in the dark. I love the quote that, Clinton talked about, where I wouldn't be the first career bureaucrat, or I wouldn't be the first president. Career bureaucrats have not just lied to, but possibly outweighted. He even said that.
Yeah.
So I don't get the feeling at all. Like, I think this is all her and her campaign, just like with Kucinich or anybody else who stumbled around this topic, who have tried to... Everybody's really stumbled around this topic. In fact, I think it could be argued that Obama's been the best at dealing with this, and he's just gone the straight make fun of the whole thing and not take it seriously at all route, whereas everybody else kind of stumbles. Clinton always stumbles and is kind of awkward around it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing,
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, what we're doing here on this show is, which is all that we can do, we're speculating because we really don't know what's going on behind the scenes in politics. We can only guess.
Well, that's my whole point, is that We don't know, and I guess this is well crafted in the way that we still don't know. Even though she's made comments, we still don't know. And I don't know if you guys agree. For instance, Steve Bassett put out an email with this kind of story about how Podesta's like the inside guy when it comes to UFO disclosure, and he's working through Hillary Clinton, and then somehow how he pulls out and says that Obama's going to be the disclosure president. I just don't see any of that in what she said here, and I don't understand that logic personally.
Well, I think basically what she's done here, regardless of her intention and her attitude about it, is she's opened the box. She's opened the Pandora's box, because now, at the very least, the UFO community is not going to let go of this.
Well, they never would have anyway.
That's
they
true.
never let go of anything.
So, I mean, we'll see. I would really love to see any kind of a confrontation between Hillary and Donald Trump, because I think that would be priceless.
Well, and that's a great point you make, too. Is Donald Trump going to jump on this? Because he would.
Yeah.
I think so.
It's right down his alley.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Is it because everyone wonders what that UFO is on top of his head?
Or wasn't his helicopter was chased by a UFO? Supposedly?
Yeah, at the Iowa State Fair last year. Yeah,
right.
But it's a big kind of wild story. It's kind of, that's why it's right down his alley. It's something wild. It's populist. That's why he may pursue it. And, you know, to give Bassett credit, Stephen Bassett credit, he runs the Paradigm Research. He's a UFO lobbyist, for anybody who doesn't know. And he's always saying that UFO disclosure is happening this year. He's been saying that for every years and years and years and years. Every president, the sitting president's always going to be the UFO disclosure president. It never is. I don't think this president's going to be the disclosure president. But to his credit, the media really hasn't picked up on the Rockefeller Initiative, which isn't as big as I think he makes it out to be. It's just that, you know,
Lawrence
Rockefeller was into UFOs, and he funded some UFO research that my colleague Antonio Huneas was involved with. In fact, he wrote this. You know, he was the writer. He physically did the writing, but he did some of the research. A lot of researchers did the research on this book of best cases, which is really cool. You can download it at our website for free. But you know, that's about as far as that went. There's really no skeletons in that closet. But it's an interesting story that the media hasn't picked up on. And, of course, Podesta's interest in all his comments on UFOs, I think, is one of the big stories for this year, and is also a big story that the media actually kind of picks up on.
Well, yeah, it was in the Washington Post and the Huffington Post, I might say. Yeah.
Huffington. Well, and you know, and you're right, and yet interestingly, I've noticed just in the last few days, the Huffington Post, and not just because that's where I'm writing, outside of the Huffington Post, there haven't been a lot of major mainstream media outlets that have even touched this Hillary Clinton story, and I find that very interesting.
Well, that's not true anymore, which is funny, and I don't know if that's due to your story or not, but Washington Post wrote a story on it today.
Oh, see, I didn't see that. I didn't see that one. Okay.
Yeah, there's been a bunch. Daily Beast wrote about it. They're all of a sudden popping up, probably due to your story, but possibly like me, they just didn't get to it because they were off on their holiday vacations.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Lee, can I ask you this? When the reporter spoke with Hillary, was it a one-on-one or was it in a group setting? And was he able to give the exact quotes of her?
Yeah, my impression was even looking at the picture from the newspaper, it looked like he was kind of following her, and you could see like a little tape recorder in one of his hands. I think he was just choosing that opportunity to remind her that they had once talked about UFOs, and he probably knew he was going to have maybe just a minute or two to to try and get a couple of quotes out of her while the moment was there. And I think that that's how that just unfolded. I haven't seen any other interaction that Hillary had with any other reporter there. It seemed to only be this guy Damon who was able to get her, and then she probably split. Because I think if anyone else had asked her any other related questions, we would have seen it in print by now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
So, before we leave this story, I think one of the other big stories for this year, like I mentioned, was John Podesta, and I think we should go over that because really this is the first time, and we've been waiting for this. Jimmy Kimmel asked Bill Clinton about UFOs. He asked Obama about UFOs. Hillary went on Kimmel. He didn't ask her about UFOs, and we were expecting it and waiting for it. Yeah. We were waiting for Hillary to answer the question at some point, and so she does today. Her campaign, so it's the first time she has answered the question about UFOs. Her campaign referred to UFOs once before, one other time, and that was in response to a tweet by some people would call Podesta a twit. Not me. I'm actually a fan. But that was in response to a tweet by John Podesta, and that was at the very beginning of the year, in February
13th. Mm-hmm.
There you go. Yeah, February 13th, he said, finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again, not securing the disclosure of the UFO files. This, of course, in the UFO arena, spawns debates as to whether he was kidding or not. Leslie Kane, who's actually worked with him, said he was joking. But Mother Jones did an article about Hillary and UFOs, and Hillary's office responded to a request for them to make a comment. And they responded, our non-campaign, because, of course, she was unofficially running at that time. She hadn't officially put in her bid for running for presidency. But they said, our non-campaign has a strict policy of not commenting on extraterrestrial activity, but the truth is out there. Then Podesta later on in September, in response to an interview that Hillary did with Lena Dunham, who's a writer and an actress. She does HBO's Girls, that TV show. He tweeted to her, great interview, Lena Dunham, but Lena ask her about aliens next time. And then finally, I don't know if you saw this yet today, Lee, but Jennifer Epstein from Bloomberg Politics, she tweeted a quote. And I'm assuming she might have got this from the Wall Street Journal or from the other Daily Beast or something like that, or straight from the article. She might have got it from your article, though, Lee. But she tweeted one of Hillary's quotes about aliens in Area 51, and John Podesta replied to it, and he said, just in time for the X-Files revival. And like he did in the other tweets, he hashtagged, the truth is out there.
Yeah. You know, and you just mentioned a minute ago how he had tweeted earlier that Lena Dunham interview where he said, next time ask Hillary about aliens. And I remember you and I had actually talked about this after he had tweeted that. And my opinion was he wasn't just suggesting to Lena that the next time you happen to interview Hillary Clinton, ask about aliens. I think this was his kind of cool way of basically saying to all of us in media, anytime any of you get the chance to interview her, just start asking her about UFOs. And that's exactly what this guy Damon did in New Hampshire. He took the opportunity and just went with it. And I think that's a response from John Podesta basically saying, hey, everybody, all of you media people, do your job. Ask some questions. If she's there and she's in a good mood, she's going to have to respond somehow. I think that's what that was about.
That is a great observation. I think you're probably 100% right. And it seems like, it's the challenge. He's throwing down the gauntlet for any of you media people who have the cojones. Ask her the question, and finally, that was in September. A few months later, finally, this guy did take the initiative, and I'll bet you it's going to be one of their biggest stories.
It may. Hey, one thing I do want to point out that you mentioned, Alejandro, is Leslie Kane. Mm-hmm. That I spoke with her a couple of days after Stephen Bassett started writing about that tweet and all that. And she said, it's basically her opinion. I asked her if she spoke to John because she is in contact with him, and she said no, she never spoke to him about, whether he was serious or not.
That is a great point. That doesn't mean that he definitely was kidding just because Leslie Kane said he was. That was her opinion. But she knows his character. She said he has a dry sense of humor. That doesn't mean necessarily for sure he was kidding, though, because we don't know for sure until someone can interview John. And I guess you're vigorously pursuing that, correct, Lee?
I am. In fact, I sent him 2 tweets today.
Wow. He's coming up on my show this Wednesday.
Oh, yeah, right.
Just,
oh, you dog. You got him before me.
In his dreams. That's what he asked Santa Claus.
Really.
Right.
Basically, I sent him a note and basically said, look, I've been writing little stories over the last couple of years in which I've quoted you. I would really like to get some more quotes from you, but I want to do it as part of an interview. Perhaps you know of some of the things I've written. Are you game? And in order to keep this private, don't answer me here on your Twitter page. Get me at, and I said lee.speigel@huffingtonpost.com because I don't care who has that address. That's my. And I said, so if you're interested, just contact me there and let's talk about this. So now I'm just waiting.
I'm crossing my fingers. I hope he does it. He's a Twitter guy. He's always on there. So maybe you should next time hashtag the truth is out there. He loves that.
Okay.
You have the space for it. Yeah.
So I guess there's that story. I mean, there's Podesta, who I guess is our first story of the year, story that we talked about. I think that was one of the biggest stories this year. What do you guys think?
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. But for me, interestingly, when you look at all the stories of the year, for me, as
don't tell us your top yet.
Oh, no, I won't. But I will say that my top was also one of my first for the year. And I'll just leave it at that for the moment.
Ooh, enticing. So I want to just share, okay, like the game, how this goes, we'll just go around, kind of round robin. We'll go, okay, you go, what's one of your top stories? That person can introduce the story, and we'll talk about it. And certainly, I mean, we're all friends, so we can share our opinions. Don't hold back and feel like there'll be any repercussions. Lee has never got upset during this whole process.
No, but when the show is over, I usually talk behind your back to all my friends and tell them what.
And I saw the voodoo doll when I was down in New York. Alejandro looks just like you.
Yeah, with pins sticking out of every possible portion of the voodoo doll.
So that's right. That's a big story this year. Martin, you got to go visit Lee?
I'm just kidding.
No, we're both just kidding.
But
there is a voodoo doll, I will tell you that.
Oh, I thought maybe Martin got to Manhattan to visit you because you get a lot of visitors.
Yes, I do.
So, which is fun. So, and they can see that on your Facebook. So, let's go ahead and go around, and let's start with you, Martin. Even though I cheated, did you see how I did that?
No problem.
Cheated and slid that in, but
that was Podesta was my number 4 on the back burner story. Anyway.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. No, I would like to talk about, and I hope I'm not stealing anyone else's thunder.
Hey, you do, you do.
The biggest story, non-story of the year, I consider it, is the Roswell alien slides.
Ooh.
Yeah, I didn't even, for me, it didn't make my list.
Huh?
On your 150?
I'll tell you because
not even on the big list.
Well, as Alejandro knows, I was so basically pissed about this story from the moment it first raised its head.
Well, let's let Martin summarize it. I'm sure our listeners know we talked about it so much.
Well, first of all, most of the people that are listening to the show know the final outcome, but I'd like to say that I first heard about it back in October on 2013, and I contacted Don Schmidt, and I said, hey, Don, can you be on my show for a few minutes? And he said, sure. And I says, I want to talk to you about, there's rumors going around about these Roswell alien slides, and I want your opinion. And so I asked him, I have this clip I would like to play from
back on
okay.
October 4th, 2013. It plays right now.
If such slides do in fact exist, and they do potentially provide genuine proof, once and for all. First of all, no such photographs ever prove anything. By today's standards, anything can be doctored, anything can be faked. So all the more reason one has to be all the more cautious.
Sure.
But say it truly depicts something of this extraordinary nature. There's a lot to lose, but there's so much more to gain in dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, and just making sure that we don't have a repeat of what happened with the MJ-12 documents or all the other photographs that have circulated through the years and have turned out to be bogus. Why would the members of my team want to be party to another such fiasco? And I can assure you, Martin, the people that are, again, creating the fiasco and spreading the rumors are not part of the team, are not the ones who are spending the money, making all the trips, as far as conducting all the research. They're just those that are just waiting to play gotcha. That we once again, we rushed the gun. We didn't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt we were dealing with something authentic, and as a result, we're a bunch of bumbling idiots once again, stumbling around in the dark, and I'm not going to have any part of that again.
So that, to me,
makes me so sad. I have a lot of background too. I'll share, especially regarding what he had said. But Martin, go ahead and summarize. That's a great clip, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. A listener to my show said, "Hey, go listen to that episode." This was after May this year. So, there was Anthony Bralgalia was involved, Jaime Mosain from Mexico, of course, and other people got involved. Like I think Dr. Edgar Mitchell, I believe, did. I know Tom Carey, of course, and Don Schmidt. They all had this 10,000-seat arena set up at the National Auditorium in Mexico City, and put on this whole event. And basically, I'm just going to put this in a real quick nutshell. The image was revealed on May 5th. I saw it the next day on May 6th, and instantly, just from my background working in museums a lot, and instantly I said, "My God, that's a mummy." Without even, that was my first instinct, but it doesn't, I'm not trying to brag in any type of way. It just hit me so strongly that has to be a mummy. I just don't understand how they could have gone this far with it. And then, of course, the placard was blurred, and the first image that got loose out there, you couldn't read anything on it. But the second, better image that was actually released, I think it was by Bragdale. It might have been due. I'm not really sure. But anyway, there was an investigative team that set up a team member of, I think there were 20 people in all, that they de-blurred this thing within a few hours. And, it basically just says that, it was a mummy found, a 2-year-old body. And so mystery solved, basically. The placard was completely revealed to what it was. Now, there's still some people out there that are holding strong that it is an alien still, and it's really, there's a lot of money involved in this situation where it has to do with the documentary and all that. So
yeah.
So go ahead. Let's hear some of your...
Yeah, let me give a little background, and Lee, we'll let you tell us why you're so pissed off about it. Oh, obviously, though, but I think you will represent the majority of the listeners who are also upset about the whole thing.
Okay.
When Don was talking about doing, because he told me something similar, I caught wind of this photo early on too. I think it was from the Bragalia stuff or some early stuff that had gone out there. And I asked Don about it, and he got a little upset, and he said, "Why are you listening to the rumors? Those guys," similar to what he told you. But then later to find out that that's not necessarily true, that he said those people are just trying to get the scoop on this, and they have nothing to do with the research. you know what? A lot of this unfortunate stuff happened because of his partner, Tom, who was talking to Bragalia, and he was giving Bragalia this information. And unfortunately, instead of Bragalia doing what he probably should have done and checked with everybody before he released information, he jumped the gun, and he was trying to be the first guy to get the information out there. But he wasn't getting it from people that were not involved with the case. He was getting it from people who were involved with the case. So they had a whole problem with the information not being contained. As far as the rest, my interpretation is that I think that Don was serious. I think he really wanted the research to go properly, but he was just one voice in a group of people who got swept away by the excitement. I think I was one of the few, if not the only guys that got to interview Tom Dew, who was the owner of the photographs. He really believed they were something mysterious. He admitted to me he wanted to make money off of it, but it was because he said, I spent a lot of money. I didn't want to go to my wife and say, hey, I got this story out there, but I lost a lot of our money. He wanted to at least break even. And I could see that. But I think the real bad guy in all of this is, someone who we know is kind of a sensationalist, which is Jaime Maussan. He's done this before. He wanted to make a big spectacle, which is by far his priority above researching and vetting, like Don was talking about. And I think Don didn't want to didn't want to just dump the whole thing. He wanted to try to influence from inside, and he lost. He was the minority in the group that got swept up with this sensationalism, and then they ended up being exactly what he said he didn't want to happen. They ended up looking like a bunch of bumbling fools because, like you said, within a day of them releasing the slide, better researchers, because their experts were not experts, if you look at their backgrounds, were able to very quickly decipher the placard and determine that it was what everybody thought. I was like you, Martin. When I saw it, I thought this looks like a because I've seen these things before. Of course, Lee, you wrote about Attaboy, and we had the whole Greer carcass thing going on. So we had seen that happen before. So, yeah, it was a sad debacle.
It was a total debacle. And from the very beginning, when there was even the slightest hint that there were two slides and they were going to be putting this out into to the public in a big event in May, and it was going to be in Mexico City. That was one of my first questions. Why Mexico City? If you've got something, show us now. Don't tease and do a bait and switch tactic that all snake oil salesmen do. Mm-hmm. And then what happened was they had promised that all of the 10,000 people who could have shown up in Mexico City, and they were going to do a live streaming of this internationally for a small amount of money, that they were going to release the two slides in high definition. Hello, did that happen? No, it never happened. And they had months to prepare to do this, to create and to really make sure that these images were the best, highest quality possible. To my recollection, when the big event happened in Mexico City, only one image was released, and it was blurry. It wasn't high definition. Mm-hmm. I was so pissed. And this is why throughout the whole thing, I refused to write even one story about it. I didn't want to give any room or any kind of support to this. And Alejandro, as you may recall, just a few months ago when we were at the MUFON Symposium, on the final day of the symposium in Southern California, I was on a panel, and that panel included Jaime Maussan, and he was kind of hemming and hawing because John Greenwald, who was the master of ceremonies and presented us on the panel, he let Jaime do the first talking about this whole Mexico City thing, and Jaime was all over. Well, we had the evidence, and it was the best evidence, and we had a few problems, and then finally, when John took the microphone from him and gave me the microphone, because he knew I was chomping at the bit, finally. And I basically said in front of the audience and in front of Jaime, nobody has the right to make promises that they cannot keep in this field. I was likening Jaime Maussan to Rick Dyer, who did the exact same thing with Bigfoot. Rick Dyer had his Winnebago that he was driving around the southern part of the United States, and he was putting Hank the Bigfoot carcass on display and taking money from people, and basically he was asking people for more money when he promised that people could see an actual documentary on Bigfoot, and that documentary turned out to be Harry and the Hendersons. So this is what I'm talking about, and this exact kind of thing happened with Jaime and these, as my father used to say, these fakakta slides, because there was nothing credible to it from the very beginning that the first announcement was even made that someone had found these slides in a box in someone's house. It was like, you know what? If you got the slides, show them now.
Yeah.
Why are you waiting to try and get people to come to Mexico City and pay for their own trips? And nobody paid for their trips. People went there on their own expecting to see something big. Well, I knew, and Alejandro and I had talked about this, Martin, that all along leading up to that big Mexico City thing, I knew that this was going to be a bad deal, and it was a bad deal. And finally, at the MUFON Symposium, when I got this off my chest, and John Greenwald gave the microphone back to Jaime, I couldn't believe it when Jaime actually said, "Well, Lee could be right."
Really?
You know, and I've been waiting for them to offer that DVD because I want to look at that. I want to look at it over and over and over again.
Right.
Because he actually did admit on stage, not just to me, but to everyone there, that maybe things didn't go the way they should have, and that maybe I was right, that it was totally mishandled from the very beginning, and it was. And
we'll need to make a GIF out of that.
That's right.
Put that on social media.
Yeah. I mean, I just hate when this kind of stuff happens. It doesn't happen a lot, but this is also one of the problems of how on the internet, on YouTube, because of the ease and the technology, you can get 10-year-olds to sit down with a minimal kind of Photoshop software, and they can create amazing-looking videos and get it out there and get their 15 seconds of fame.
Right, and you know what? I just do not. The numbers don't fit. Jaime says he didn't make any money. He lost money on the whole thing. Yeah. But the numbers don't work. That's not what he said to begin with. He said he made a ton of money, and I think he did. You know, I think that unfortunately Tom Carey and Don Schmidt, the main researchers, are the ones who took most the brunt of the bad. And Jaime made money. I think at least Adam Dew made his money back. And he said he could have gone with a scientific journal or magazine that was going to do a thorough investigation, but they weren't going to be able to pay him enough money. And instead he went with Jaime, who could make him some money. And, you know, that at least he was honest about why he did what he did. But you said it good, Martin, when you said it's kind of a non-story, because luckily, Lee, you weren't the only one who didn't write about it, which is great. Mainstream media ignored it. I think Pope made the point that mainstream media didn't even care. So the only one who cared were ufologists. But I agree.
And we're totally lucky about that.
Yeah.
And one other thing, what you're hitting on just now, Alejandro, I do want to say, you know, there is a second part of the clip, but I didn't want to add. It's too long. But basically that he says the thing you don't want to do ever is to put this out in the UFO community. You want to put it out in just the public.
Wow. Well.
So,
yeah, and you know, and what we didn't even mention here is lately, when I say lately, really literally only maybe in the last year, there have been these email threads that have been going around and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you look at the names of the people who are on this thread, it's basically everyone, the top names in ufology, and they're all out there bickering with these emails at each other and criticizing and accusing. And oh my God, are these people nuts? Is that what UFOs have come to? I mean, I first started getting interested in UFOs back in the early 70s, and back then there were many more organizations. We had APRO, we had NICAP, early MUFON. This was before the Center for UFO Studies. There were a lot of little UFO organizations. And even back then, the attitude was, well, no, you can't look at the pictures we have. No, you can't look at any of the images we have. No, this is ours. It's ours. Are they kidding? This is not ours. It belongs to everybody.
That's what's fun about like the Open Minds UFO group or those online groups, because I think it's cool to put those out to everybody. And like when the slides went out, actually that was great, because then you had kind of citizen science going on. Everybody was looking at them, and then you had a group of people who figured it all out. And that's really cool when that happens.
Yeah, I think that was if there was any light at all to this whole story, it's that. The fact that, the UFO community basically stepped up and called this thing out.
Mm-hmm. Well, we should move on. Lee.
Yes.
What's your big story?
My big one. Oh, well, this for me is a total no-brainer.
Ooh.
And I can't give enough praise on the planet to John Greenwald for what he did in January that got everybody so excited for about a week. When he made the Project Blue Book files available to everybody, and then it got taken down, and it's still down. This originally was every ufologist's dream. I mean, I remember in the 1970s, I made several trips to Washington to go to the National Archives because I was looking up information for some stories that I wanted to write about things that were in the Project Blue Book archives. And in order to do that, back then, you actually had to go to Washington. You had to get the microfilm canisters. You had to sit in front of one of these big old microfilm projectors and try and find the thing. I mean, total hassle, but that was the only way to do the research. And John Greenwald worked it out. So he took JPEG images of the 130,000 pages from the 22-year Air Force study of Project Blue Book, and he used his skills. He turned it all into searchable PDF files. And he put it on the Black Vault, his amazing website, and instantly. I mean, I remember Alejandro and I, we went crazy about this because you really could easily, in the comfort of your own home, in your computer, you could do the kinds of search online that I used to have to go to the National Archives to do. It was amazing. What a gift! And then it was gone. Mm-hmm. And that was such a letdown for all of us.
It was a copyright issue or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a company called Fold 3, and they post military files, and I think they're involved with Ancestry.com. Mm-hmm. And they claimed to have some kind of a copyright on the old Air Force files. But is that really true? Because Project Blue Book, ever since 1969, has been in the public domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a technology site that did a story on it and the legality, which was really cool. And they called it into question, saying that it's probably not legal, that it would probably have to go to court. And that's unfortunately what John couldn't afford, but he would probably win. And even if he didn't win, it's wrong that they can have those files, which are public domain, and charge people to go through them. And it's not as easy as what Greenwald provided. Greenwald provided something much better than they have to make those even more readily accessible and easily searchable. And these guys, and what's even worse is I suspect that the National Archives provided Fold 3 of those files. If that's true, then they have no claim over them because that's taxpayer dollars that provided those files, and then it's completely wrong. So hopefully someone goes to trial on this and takes this on because, yeah, it's I think, bad. And I so agree with you. And Martin, I mean, what's your take? There are some John Greenwald detractors out there, as you know, who felt that they should be taken down.
No, what I was hearing for the short time those were up, people that are really involved in doing a lot of research wrote me and they were saying, "My God, it's so easy to search these files now." Everyone was excited about it.
Yeah.
I totally think that he would win if it did go to court. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the backing for that, and it would probably cost a lot, in legal fees to go forward with something like that. But like you said, I'm pretty sure that he probably would win because if that's where they came from, they belong to everybody, really. I mean, no, I don't think anybody could even make money. These Fold 3 shouldn't be able to make money if it was taken out of a public domain. That's my own.
I'll put this out there because I know someone who's willing to take this on. But we don't have the expertise John Greenwald had. I have the JPEGs, but I can't turn them into searchable JPEGs or PDFs like John Greenwald did. If I had that expertise, I could do that, and I have someone who's willing to take this on. But John cannot get involved. Since he was already involved with this, he can't get involved at all, or else, there could be some liability there. They could claim he provided the files, and then, he's got legal issues. So I'll put that out there. If someone's willing to help, if they know how to do that, I know someone who can take that on because it's worth doing. I think that, there were even some non-UFO people that felt this was a freedom of information issue that needs to be taken on.
And that's why this was my number one story, only because of the historic value of all of this, and all the work that John put into making this available to everybody. For the short time that those files were available, I was spending days. Every day I'd spend a little time looking through them, and it was amazingly easy to go through the Project Blue Book stuff. Certainly a lot of the stuff was redacted, and you couldn't really see a lot of the really juicy stuff, but it was all there. You could just turn your computer on, sit down, and just go and look at the stuff, and that was amazing to be able to do that.
Yeah, the Blue Book files are incredible. So, this is kind of funny, which doesn't surprise me. I was thinking of this early on when I was putting together my files, because I totally agree with you, Leah. I was glad you brought that up, because I had that, out there, and I was hoping that story would come up. Yeah. But I knew you and I especially would choose more media and social kind of, even though Martin did as well, stories as opposed to sightings, because I don't know, like you mentioned earlier, and I think you mentioned, we're talking about Martin, Don mentioned, he doesn't like to focus on the UFO community, which we don't either. We look more towards what is impactful in this phenomena to the mainstream. That's why I think these stories are important. And that's why my number one, which is also the number one for our readers of our website, our most read story essentially, this year, it's tragic that it hasn't gotten to the mainstream really, not even on the Huffington Post, unfortunately, and that's the Puerto Rico UFO video. I can't say enough for the group that put this together, the researchers that worked on this, because they're a great bunch of guys with some really good backgrounds. They call themselves now the Coalition for Scientific UFO Research, SCU. But anyways, this is a Homeland Security video. So essentially, someone who worked with they're really elusive as to the careers of all the people involved, and that's what's difficult about this case, is that everybody wanted to remain anonymous, essentially, and not share who they worked for or when, but somehow this Homeland Security, through people who worked with Homeland Security, they had to have right to get the video, even though can't say where they worked, these guys essentially, there's this video of this object that flies from the ocean over an airport and then back over the ocean again. It was being filmed by a infrared system that was on board an aircraft that essentially is out looking for drug runners. The people on board the craft thought this object was strange, anomalous, something they hadn't seen before. They submitted it to their superiors. Their superiors sent it up the chain of command. It came back. Apparently the Air Force looked at it. The Air Force said, "We don't know what this is. Maybe you should go have some civilian UFO researchers look at it." So that's exactly what they did. However, they still were in fear of, repercussions. It got then to a lady with Florida MUFON, actually a lady who is a writer, and she's pretty famous. She's a famous fiction writer. But once it got to her, she took it to Morgan Bial, who is the head of Florida MUFON. These people did not want it to be a MUFON case because with MUFON you have to at least give your information of who you are and everything. And the reason for that, which makes sense, because MUFON can't really investigate it if they don't know everyone involved. So I think it's a good policy that MUFON has. So they kind of had to research this on their own. He got together a few other people, including MUFON's director of research, MUFON's STAR team manager, and they all had to do this separately. So they researched it and they couldn't figure out what it was. They got other experts involved, and so far experts who have looked at this cannot definitively decide what this is. Mark D'Antonio, who of course we all talk with often and is kind of one of the experts we refer to, he suspects that the object could be something like a balloon. However, he hasn't finished his analysis to demonstrate that completely, so he hasn't completely finished his analysis. And where I took his thoughts to an expert on FLIR who has been working with this group, and he was at least able to discount some of those ideas. For instance, a balloon is one of the ideas. His analysis is that it can't be a balloon because it's too hot. If you the dark objects are really hot, and when you look at the other objects in there, only some real hot objects such as exhaust from planes and things like that are really dark, and this object was really dark, so it's too hot to be a balloon. And then birds, it doesn't fly like a bird. So, and those were the two big theories out there, and it also doesn't have a similar thermal signature of a bird. And then the group also feels they were able to estimate speeds that were very fast, and they think it went into the water and then broke into two pieces and was still kept flying around. So I think this is a great case. I think it's that it got some tabloid UK coverage, but it's tragic that it didn't get more mainstream coverage, because it's one of the best investigated cases I've seen in a long time.
And I would like to add to that, and Alejandro, I told you this several times during the year. The story that you wrote about this was so good. It was so detailed. It was so perfectly researched. I could not have done any better a job than you did, and that was probably my primary reason for not even tackling it. You did an amazing job getting this story together. Which is great, but I'm not mainstream media. And Huffington Post is an aggregate. So, I mean, you guys cover other people's stories often. So that would have been a great outlet to break through to the media. I mean, it seems that your story broke this Hillary thing out. You weren't the first one to write about the Hillary thing. It was that other person from the Conway Daily Sun who really got. But you're a bigger outlet. Well, the thing, I know that I must have mentioned this to you at least once when you and I had been talking about this during the year. I'm sure, because I've suggested this to you before. Yes, HuffPost is a more mainstream, and you are one of HuffPost's best bloggers.
But blogs I've wrote a blog just last week. I've written many blogs. They don't get a fraction of the view as the staff stories. They don't get the placement. They don't get the promotion. So that's just not an option. That's not getting it into the mainstream.
Well, I mean, if I missed the boat on this one, then I apologize. At the same time that I'm praising you up and down for what you did.
Well, and it's not about me though. It's about the stories that This is one of the best examples of how to do ufology right, and it's an example how it got the same treatment as the Roswell slides when it comes to mainstream media. And what's great about this is that NARCAP, which is a very conservative organization, the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, even they were bold enough to come out, which is rare for them, because Dr. Richard Haynes, who runs it, an incredible background, they were bold enough to come out in support of this case. Which speaks to the credibility of the case. But for me, this is number one, and it was really cool to see when I looked at it today. It also got the most hits this year.
Yeah.
Oh, it did.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that I was looking at that today because I know that was going to be one of the stories coming up on this show. And when I had looked at it initially, I thought I saw it going through the water, and now it's probably just the angle. It's probably over the water instead. And it's so hard to tell, but it does appear like it is moving very, very fast. But also, and this could be a trick of the eye, I'm not sure, it almost looks like it's tumbling. And in that case, I was thinking, well, maybe it is a balloon, and maybe the heat signature is because it's a dark color and, is getting some sun saturation or something.
Well, here's the hard part with speculating, and I understand how we want to do that, and even I felt that way. But what's really important is you always have to rely on expert opinion. And whenever you talk to experts, they're able to explain all of those things. And for instance, this expert had talked about with the tumbling is that you can't really tell necessarily because you're seeing a heat signature. You're not necessarily seeing the object or the object's shape. You're just seeing the heat, the hot part of it. So that can be difficult to determine. Yeah, it's hard to say on that end. So, and because there are experts involved, it's kind of like flying with your instruments, with your instruments. You can't rely on your own senses. Got to rely on those of expert opinion, and that's what's fascinating about this is the experts thus far have been so baffled by what they see.
Yeah, it's a great case. It really is. Do you know if there's? You said that Mark has not finished his analysis of it. Do you know if anyone else is still involved in researching this?
No, I know there were other skeptics that wanted to try to tackle it and see if they could figure it out. But from what I understand, they've all kind of given up. So they've all just decided to move on. And since like a lot of the good stories, it's come and gone. I guess they don't feel the need to tackle this anymore. So unfortunately, it may just be lost to obscurity. But I'll do my best to keep bringing it up because I think it's a really important case.
I agree. Yeah, I do.
And we will have Robert Powell, who's the Director of Research for MUFON and part of the SCU, and he'll be reviewing this case and giving us updates at the UFO Congress this year.
Oh, great.
Good. Nice. Okay.
Now, just one, before we move on, Alejandro, you're saying that all the parties involved with this wanted to remain anonymous?
They were able, their credentials essentially were checked by the investigators. And one individual, and I got to see some of that. But otherwise, it's not released to the public.
And what about radar? Was there any radar on this?
There was some radar, and that's a really interesting story. Robert tells this story better. He was the one who received the radar. FAA, this is really interesting. The FAA does not release radar data, but he got it from the Air Force because the Air Force shares, our FAA shares the radar data with the Air Force. So if the Air Force has data on record, then they have to share it with the public. That policy changed literally days after Robert was able to take advantage of that. Now the Air Force will not forward FAA radar data. But the radar data did correspond with what the witness testimony was. So, yeah, really another really interesting aspect. And that's interesting that the Air Force, in this case, was more forthcoming than the FAA.
Right. That's highly unusual.
Yeah. So it's your turn.
Oh, it is? Okay. Well, all right. So I thought a couple of things were, I wanted to look at a couple of different things that were reported on over last year, and besides sightings. And so I bounced back and forth between the two. One of them was that basically NASA was saying that proof of aliens should be here within 20 years. I think that's a story when NASA actually can come out and say that publicly, that they think that there'll be proof of aliens within 20 years.
Mm-hmm. And it was an individual in particular, correct?
I did not get a chance to listen to the whole interview, and it's a whole hour long. So I don't know if it's if they were all agreeing on it. But if you read into the story, it says that it was the NASA's astrophysics director Paul Hertz, who kind of explained most of this about.
Which is really cool because, Lee, you could probably, he's a Huffington Post blogger. Seth Shostak, I think, has said something similar. And I think there are several NASA administrators that have felt the same way. Although, Lee, you interviewed after our UFO Congress last year one of our speakers who was a NASA scientist who says they've already discovered life.
Yeah, and I think we need to be really careful. We need to clarify exactly what was said, because it's my understanding, and I think the first person I heard even say this was, in fact, Seth Shostak. For those people who don't know, he's a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute in California, and what Seth said, and what many other astronomers have said, is that within 20 years, they believe there will be proof of life elsewhere. But no one has actually said, to my knowledge, alien. In other words, we need to be careful about giving the impression that an alien is going to show up in a ship, because that's the impression that it's too easy to give out. What the scientists are saying, and they're being cautious, is that within 20 years, with all the information that's coming through from the Kepler spacecraft and new telescopes that are being built, we will probably have proof that there is other life out there, and it's probably, most of these guys will say, it's probably microbial life, and that's the difference. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here with what we think they're talking about.
Well, her quote, at this story, I was able to bring it up with my incredible MacBook Air. Big Apple fan, because my PC's been giving me heck today. But, one of the NASA administrators, she's a scientist. She's NASA's chief scientist, actually.
Oh, Ellen?
Yeah, Ellen Stofan. So her quote was that I think we're going to have a strong indications of life beyond Earth within a decade, and I think we're going to have definitive evidence within 20 to 30 years.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying.
However, another NASA administrator was talking to British school children This was Charles Bolden. He is the NASA administrator.
Right.
And he was asked if aliens exist, and if Area 51 was real, sort of thing. And he said he does. He said Area 51 was real, which was kind of interesting. He didn't really say much beyond that. He said it's not what people think, it's for research. And he never saw any aliens or alien spacecraft when he was there.
Right.
But he said, I do believe that we will someday find other forms of life, or a form of life, if not in our solar system, then in some of the other solar systems, the billions of other solar systems in the universe. Although, I think you've got a good point, but I guess the term aliens, though, it comes down to a semantical kind of thing, huh?
Well,
I was
because
reading the headline.
Yeah.
I was basically reading the headline of that story when I first started. But, Lee, can you go back to what Alejandro said earlier? You spoke to a NASA scientist that he claimed that they already found something? Did I hear you say that? Did I hear that right?
Mm-hmm.
What he was basically saying was that he had found from looking at pictures that had been taken on Mars that in some close-ups of rock formations, he felt that there were indications of some kind of fossilization. Again, not alien to us, but again, fossil formations. And when he started talking about it to his colleagues at NASA, somewhere along the line, the new pictures had been brought out showing that apparently the Martian rover that had taken the picture was perhaps instructed by someone to go back to this rock and scrape away the rock so that the fossilization could not be seen anymore. Yeah. And for whatever the reasons are that they don't want us to know about this yet, but again, we're not talking about aliens like who run spaceships and who have intelligence and they walk and they talk. That's not the kind of alien that any of these scientists are talking about. And that's why I like to, as much as I believe, I mean, hell, I don't mind going on record and saying I think Earth is being visited by someone. I don't have a problem giving that out as my personal opinion, okay? I can't personally prove it, but I'm okay speculating on that based on what people have told me and my own research. But all of these pronouncements that have been coming out through SETI and NASA, when they say life is going to be discovered within the next 10 or 20 years, they're not talking about aliens. They're talking about very simplistic forms of life. And
well, that depends on what the definition of aliens is. It's just like UFOs. UFOs does not mean extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Yeah, exactly.
Aliens doesn't mean a being, like on the movie Aliens. Technically, the dictionary defines it as a creature that comes from somewhere other than the planet Earth. I guess it could be even a very small creature.
Sure.
Is it plankton a creature? Like they say they found the Russians that they found. But yeah, you're right. They mean microbes.
Yeah, and to them, this is exciting, but that's not what not what we in the public want to hear. We want to hear, let's sit down with some aliens at a table and get it on.
Whoa,
I still think
Captain Kirk.
I still think personally that once it really comes out that hey, there is alien microbes, extraterrestrial microbes out there, we have proof of it. I think that is one of the. Even though it's not intelligent life, I still think that it's going to be one of the biggest announcements.
I completely agree. And we have so many places in our solar system where that kind of life is probably hanging out right now.
Mm-hmm.
I get excited about sending an unmanned spacecraft to Titan, the moon of Saturn, or to Europa, Europa. I mean, come on, there are these small planetoid moons out there that we already know are gigantic frozen ices that are on top of oceans. Let's get out.
What's exciting, and I think that's what Martin's getting at here, which I totally agree, is that this year and it happens more and more every year, NASA is more forthcoming about places where not only there might be, but the likeliness of the discovery.
Oh,
So
I agree.
to hear them openly saying that within the next 20 years, that is exciting. And I agree, too, and that once we find life elsewhere, I think it'll really open people's minds up, and it's going to be a bigger deal than people think. That, now, if there are microbes so close, what else is out there?
Of course. And here's the frustrating thing about all of this. It's like, damn it, Bones, as Kirk would say to McCoy, damn it, Bones, we don't have hyperdrive or warp speed so that we could just send a spacecraft there so it'll be there in a week and we'll know in a week. This is going to take decades before we even know that. And so many of us that are involved in this research, we're not going to be around to see that. And that's what frustrates me more than anything else.
There are so many researchers who were mentors of mine that, when I started doing all of this, and now they've passed away without knowing. In fact, this year I can think of like Julie Schuster, who ran the Roswell Museum for quite some time, and was also daughter to the PR guy who wrote the Roswell press release that got everything all excited. What is his name? Hott?
Yeah, Walter
Hott. And she passed away this year, unfortunately, from cancer, and I knew her for quite some time.
It's like I firmly believe, and many people do, that on one of these ocean moons of either Jupiter or Saturn, that yes, there could be very likely life there. But in order for us to determine that, just the journey to get there is going to take so long that's so frustrating to me.
Like the movie Europa, which was great, and I think you like that movie too, right?
Loved that movie.
Did you see that, Martin?
No, I said plus to drill through all the ice to get down to see.
Sure.
Just like the movie Europa. Did you see that movie, Martin?
I don't think so.
You've got to see it. It's really good. You'd love it because it's along these lines. By the way, I wrote a great story about the drilling devices that we're going to use. But, Lee, what's your next story?
One of the stories that I really like that just happened in December on the International Space Station, astronaut Scott Kelly, who is in the middle of, being like the longest human to spend time in space, he's been snapping all kinds of amazing pictures of the Earth from the space station. And he took a picture of South India, lit up at night, beautiful picture. And, all those internet UFO hunters were looking at the picture and they started speculating about this bright tube-like object at the upper right corner of the image. It's like it looked like a long tube with a couple of white lights on either end of it, with the darkness of space behind it. And it was just the latest in this whole long series of objects that have been photographed by space station astronauts, and it fuels all the internet chatter about UFOs. And this went on for like a couple of weeks. People were saying, how could Scott Kelly not notice in the upper right-hand corner this UFO? Well, it was easy because all you had to do, and several people, including myself, did this from the story I wrote. I took the original picture that Kelly had snapped, and you can see this thing. It looks kind of weird. And all I did was adjust the brightness and the contrast, and when I did that, you could easily see this was part of a UHF antenna attached to the space station. Nothing more to see here, folks. Move along. Case closed. But the people are out there that make these things go viral. They don't want to hear those kind of explanations. It's like if it's weird and if it doesn't look right, it must be a UFO. They're watching us. Like, come on, folks. Get a grip.
These NASA photos are my ongoing Roswell slides. I hate writing stories about them. I try not to. The only reason I wrote about that story is because when I got to go to Johnson Space Center recently, I asked an astronaut and a PR lady about it. So I wrote a short story about it. which unfortunately the UK tabloids picked up and blew out of proportion, like they have with all of these photos.
Yeah.
And what's funny about this is I was criticizing in that story the very writer who took my quote and used it in his UK tabloid story, which is so ironic. But yeah, these stories are so frustrating because it just demonstrates really poor research, and it brings up a really good point, especially now that this year is ending, that really right now in ufology, I think we are in the era of the UFO, especially UK tabloid. This is the UK tabloid era of ufology. They are taking these stories, doing a Jaime Maussan on them, and over-sensationalizing. They're probably getting tons of hits. They're completely inaccurate. They're poorly researched. They try to play both ends where they're making fun of it, but also trying to capitalize on it. And it's really wreaking havoc. And I always try to look at these in a sociological kind of sense. But it is unfortunate when it comes to credible research.
I mean, there are people, literally, people who spend hours and hours at their computer, and anybody can do this. You turn on the computer, you go to a specific NASA website where there's like a constant live camera that's attached to the space station, looking out into space, and you can just sit there, and if there's any kind of bright object that seems to be moving or off in the distance, suddenly they're writing stories about it, and it's going viral. And they do this almost daily. And I say it's like William Shatner once said on a Saturday Night Live skit about Star Trek. He basically said to people, "Get a life."
You mean like UFO sightings daily?
Well, no, I didn't mention Scott Waring. Oh my gosh!
What do you think, Martin? What are your thoughts? Are you as frustrated? You're not as much of a crotchety old guy as Lee is, and I'm becoming.
I just haven't been around as long as you two. That's what it is.
Yeah. Okay.
And worn down. I think that we kind of touched on this earlier. What was pissing Lee off to begin with the Roswell thing, and what it is people are you just said it. People are more interested in the bang for the buck, the phrase UFO or the spectacular sightings or whatever, than they are to do the research. And I think UFO is one of the top words searched on the internet. It's in the top something. I don't know exactly. But it's a buzzword, and it's a buzzword that is terribly abused. And when it comes to something like this, you mentioned the British tabloids, Alejandro. You must get alerts like I do, Google alerts or whatever. So every day you see British tabloids, and they have a sensational story, and most of them, again, are non-stories. So I think it's all about capitalizing on the traffic.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
It is a shame.
Yeah, and people often complain to me. I'll get comments at the bottom of my stories, or I'll get just individual emails, and people will complain to me, "Why don't you give us really good UFO stories? Why are you handing us this crap every day that we know are not real UFOs? Will you please give us something we can, sink our teeth into?" And my response to them is, I'm trying to. And if it turns out, everybody, that 99% of the stories I'm going to write about can have an easy explanation, well, I'm not just going to not write about it because I'm still looking for that 1%. If I'm only going to spend time hoping to find the 1%, you're not going to get more than like a story from me every 6 months, maybe. So the point is, this is my job. My job is just to present information, and I'll call upon people like Mark D'Antonio, Ben Hansen, James Oberg, the former rocket scientist. I need these people to explain these stories so we can push these stories to the side and make way for the new ones. If we don't do this, what are we going to write about?
Yeah, And I mean the sensationalizing. I don't know. Some people just like that. When it comes to worldview and propping up what they want to believe.
Yeah.
I want to believe like X-Files instead of searching for the truth. But and with Martin talks about UFOs being such a big buzzword on the internet, that's what just still makes me laugh about the Conway Daily Sun, and I think that's what happens with the UK papers. They write a UFO story, they find out they get tons of hits, so they just start following them up and keep doing UFO stories because they get tons of hits.
I did, for my pre-Christmas story, and this didn't even make my top stories of the year, but I did a nice piece on all of the Renaissance art in the 13th, 14th, and 15th century that appear to have interesting objects in the paintings that look very similar to what people are reporting in the skies today. And the headline, the original headline that I put in the story was something like, Renaissance arts show very strange objects that shouldn't be there. Well, my editor changed that headline to, look, is that a UFO over Jesus' head?
I saw that. Now, you did not get, you don't have any control over that? They can just plain change the title on you?
Well, I mean, I put a story together. I give a suggested headline and a sub-headline, give it to my editor, and he'll go over it. And he generally doesn't think that I come up with good enough headlines. And I think he's right, because the purpose of a headline is to entice the reader to want to click on the story and get into the story. Fine. So when he changed the headline to, look, is that a UFO over Jesus' head? You know what? I didn't have a problem with that, because basically what that headline did is to ask an honest question, the same kind of question that I have asked when I've seen pictures like that, the same question that many people ask. Is that a UFO? And I'm not saying, and nowhere in my story did I use the word alien or extraterrestrial. All that I like to do is to stay anchored and say, is it a UFO? Which means, is it an unidentified object? That's all I want to ask. And so I turned to an art historian from New York University, and he didn't like what we did with the story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did not like it, and we went back and forth with emails, and he wanted us to change the headline. He wanted to add more information that would give more explanation about these things in the paintings, and I mean, there were just other things that he didn't like about it. He felt that I was kind of misleading the readers with the use of the word UFO, and I kept explaining to him, UFO does not mean alien, and that's always been my stance. But the world doesn't see it that way. Everybody, when everybody sees the word UFO, it's extraterrestrial. It must be. It's a UFO.
And when they see those images, lots of people, when they see those images, even though I read the story, the art historian was able to explain what's actually in those images. Yeah. Mark D'Antonio has done that before. He's done a talk like that. But when you look at them, you think UFO because they look like what we think of as UFOs. So, I mean, I agree it's a fair term to use.
Wasn't it something like they used from old pagan art symbolism for the sun and the moon or something like that?
The sun and the moon. That was in one of the paintings called the Crucifixion, where you see Jesus on the cross. He's surrounded by people on the ground, and in the sky above him, there's something that there are two little objects that each one has a person inside them, and it looks like they're piloting these separate objects. Yeah. Well, okay. The art historian explained that one is the sun and one is the moon, and et cetera, et cetera. I loved his explanations because there is room for symbolic interpretations of these things. But you can't please everybody, and I don't know if the book is still closed on that. I used quotes from Jacques Vallée. in this story because Jacques' reference, his focus of research now is looking at UFO reports beginning from 1879 and moving backward in time. And he says that there are a lot of reports from the time of the Renaissance, reports made by scientists at the time, scholars, noblemen, and these are people who were the scientists of these times who were looking at things in the sky and who couldn't identify things. So they weren't even involved with paintings, and they were seeing things in the skies through their early instruments and telescopes, which would be classified as unidentified. So there's nothing wrong with using that term.
Right. All right, we'll move to the next story, because this is a story I wrote a Huffington Post blog about because I thought it was so cool. It's another story that I think is so incredibly credible. I wrote this in late January, and this was before the era of the UK tabloid, or else they would have taken this story and ran with it, and who knows what they would have done with it. But it's a great story, I think, and it still has not been solved. And this is UFOs that have flown over nuclear power plants in France. They've also flown over them in Belgium. And at least in one case, the person in charge of the base has said that these were not drones that were flying over, they were UFOs. So part of the story, the reason why it got so big is that there are anti-nuke protesters who have been protesting and saying, hey, these nuclear facilities are not safe. Look, you have drones flying over them. Some of these UFO sightings were blamed on these anti-nuke organizations, but the people in charge of these power plants, they know they're not drones. At least in one instance, there were some kids that were once they saw the story, decided to try to fly a drone over the nuclear power plant, but they were not able to do it, and they got their drone was taken, and they got in trouble for it, arrested. I'm not sure what happened to them. But this was I had forgotten about this story until I was looking into the stories for the year. But this was a really cool story. One of the guys who was looking into it is a German news blogger named Andreas Mueller. And he writes about, he calls it frontier science, which includes lots of paranormal and UFOs. He's a great guy who has a neat website over there who forwards me stories sometimes. But this is a great story, and as far as I know, it has not been solved. And luckily, at least for us, it's been one of our top stories for the year.
Wow. Well, I agree, and it's kind of like it's very closely related to the stories that Robert Salas, former military officer, had talked about so many UFOs that have been seen over our nuclear missile installations, and in addition to nuclear power plants, it's like basically, as we all know, we're dealing with something that I think most people agree who have done the research on this. We're dealing with something that basically can show up anywhere it wants to in the skies around our planet, and they can't be caught. They can't be stopped. Mm-hmm. And that's why people get nervous when they think that there are UFOs above a nuclear power plant. It's like, well, why are they there? What are they going to do? Are they going to force an eruption or a meltdown at the plant? But that kind of thing doesn't seem to be happening. And so I guess I take a little comfort in that. Maybe they're just curious or what, but I don't think that I don't think it's unfair to have people say, well, no, it must be just drones. I mean, it could be something that is unidentified, and we don't know what their agenda is. Why are they targeting nuclear installations or nuclear power plants? So, yeah, I agree with you. It's a really good story, and I'm not sure that people should get nervous about it, but it's still a really good story.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I was I had an insurance agent 25 years or so ago, and he said that he belonged to a special task force in the Air Force during the Vietnam War that was investigating UFOs, and I'm like, this guy was he was a very serious guy, and I just had no BS meter come up, and but anyway, one of the things he said, yes, and he says, and they're also around nuclear power plants, they're around nuclear missiles and all that, and it was like, wow. I was really interested in what he had to say, and unfortunately, I have never been able to remember his name and get a hold of him again.
Wow.
I myself, probably your listeners or some of them are not going to like this, but I'm totally against nuclear power for only the reason of one thing, and that's we're putting the burden of 9,000 generations to watch over the waste, which is deadly, going to be deadly for that long, and 250,000 years. And one of the I've talked to Robert Hastings about this, and one of the possible ideas is that we are we're playing with fire here, and notice us or see what we can do, because the nukes have gone down unexplainably in different times. In Russia they were activated at one time, so there is some type of connection, and we are truly playing with fire when it comes to nuclear power or anything nuclear, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, Lee should be especially worried because he's not too far from a power plant, and it's one of them that Michio Kaku is always warning is just completely unsafe and near one of the most populated area in the United States.
Yeah, it's up on the Hudson River, further north of the city, and yeah, there's always talk about it and possible leaks or leakages, and all that we can do is hope that the powers that be know what they're doing. And I keep thinking about that movie, the China Syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
That showed how you could have a meltdown if you're not controlling it, and people do seem to think that nuclear power is where it's at. I'm not sure that I agree with that, like Martin. There have to be other ways, but we haven't come up with a new alternative or a better alternative for it yet.
Yeah, I agree with you, Martin. It's like we're playing with fire, and we need energy that's not polluting, but it's hard. And
I personally think that maybe this is a little over the top, but I think in 30 years we're going to have that solution, if some type of fusion or hydrogen use of energy, or that would be awesome, because hydrogen is the most plentiful element in the universe.
Supposedly, I guess the Germans activated a fission generator. I don't even know what that means.
That's right. Yeah.
But fusion,
ran for an hour or something, right? Yeah.
I go by the Tonopah. We have a nuclear power plant out here, and it just boggles my mind, the technology and the power. And I think Robert Hastings' work is some of the most credible out there. He has just numerous military witnesses, an incredible amount of them who have worked around nuclear facilities, who have seen UFOs, and it makes a lot of sense that this technology that is by far the most destructive that we are capable of producing would be observed by higher intelligences if they're out there.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
So finally, to wrap up, because we're pretty much out of time, I'll let you guys, if you want to do a quick hit. I'm going to do 2-story quick hits.
Okay.
So one of the other stories I wanted to talk about was this Kepler mystery, where these scientists saw the dimming in that sun, or they still see that dimming. I think that's a fascinating and great story, just because it really caught the public's attention, and these scientists were really taking the possibility of an extraterrestrial civilization seriously. And then also, I'm always fascinated by foreign other official UFO investigation organizations. So I think it's great to see that the Argentine Air Force is active in investigating UFOs, and they have a department that does this, and they released a report recently, and they did a great job. I mean, they did the job. They went and figured out what these cases were, and you can tell they put a lot of hard work into them, and that just came out just like within the month.
Right.
You guys got a couple you want to shout out?
Well,
Go
sure.
ahead.
Well, yeah. I guess I could shout out one. You know, talking about international things. I mean, certainly one of my favorites. See, and I'm already laughing. But how can you not laugh and wonder about this? The man who's the president of the World Chess Organization.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In Russia, you know, I can never pronounce his last name, but his first name is
Ilyumzhinov. Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, who is the president of Kalmykia.
Oh, listen to you.
We've done so many stories that I've finally, after a year of doing them, remembered his name. And I'm going to talk about him at the UFO Congress this year.
Oh, well, that's great. I think that the thing that stood out in my story is that after his very serious story trying to get people to believe that he was taken aboard a spaceship and he was taken for a ride and then they brought him back. But his thing is that he believes that aliens invented the game of chess.
Right. Of course they did.
So
this guy's friends with Putin.
I know, and then I'll give you one other quick hit because Alejandro, you did a great job in helping to uncover this. It's what I call the Christmas tree lights over Tucson. You know, this is back on July 4th, where Tom Sanger videotaped a very colorful display of changing lights over a canyon northeast of Tucson. And beautiful lights, and maintained that there's no way that there could be any humans involved with this out there because it was such a remote area. And you did some digging, and the story that you eventually wrote about it actually proved after some investigation that these lights were caused by human activity, like the headlights of oncoming vehicles.
Mm-hmm. And the guy who cracked that case is actually the chief investigator for Arizona MUFON. In my opinion, one of the best chief investigators for MUFON out there, and his name is Dennis Fryermuth. He's awesome.
Good. I'm glad you mentioned that because that was it was a good case because
he did a great job.
Yeah, it stretched out over a period of time, and he went out there and he did a lot of investigating. He talked to like the forest rangers out there, and you know, and so they turned out they weren't UFOs. But until you know what they are, you've got to do the legwork.
Yeah, exactly. Martin, got a quick hit or two?
Yeah, just real quick. You know, we already touched on it, but I thought Obama, the interview with Jimmy Kimmel, was really great. What I thought was really interesting about that is what Ben Hansen did with the video afterwards.
Right.
That's a good point. I wanted to mention Ben Hansen because he did the Clinton Kimmel and the Obama Kimmel, and it really makes you think. I think he did a great job with those.
I think he said he had about 90 hours into doing that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was cool that Kimmel referred to it.
Yes.
In an interview.
Yes, he did. And I mean, it was basically he took like a 3-minute interview and turned it into a 30-minute analysis of body movement, body language. Oh yeah. So it was great.
That was good stuff. And the last one is just an interesting story. I thought it was that a metallic orb could have been sent to us. This was just a speculation of scientists. It's a little metal orb they found that they believe is extraterrestrial. The person investigating this, I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name, is Chandra Wikanashki or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
He works with Dr. Hoover out of I think it's the University of Birmingham. Where they're the guys who think that they found extraterrestrial microbes and, in this case, this small little orb.
So, like, it could be the idea of panspermia, which I think is totally illogical that it could happen.
I think it's great you mentioned that because those are still outstanding questions that Dr. Hoover, who Lee interviewed, and this Chandra I can't say his last name. But yeah, the work that they've done, I think, really should be looked at more closely, because they may have discovered alien life there.
And they were using electron microscopes too, because these are very small objects that we're talking about.
Okay, this is how you pronounce his last name.
Chandra Vikram Singha. Chandra Vikram Singha.
Well, we're out of time, guys.
All right.
So it's so awesome to have you both on the show. You guys are great. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But we've got to wrap things up. Of course, Martin does Podcast UFO. He's on the show every week doing the news with us. Lee Speigel, writing for the Huffington Post. We refer to his stories practically every week. So one of the, Huffington Post, people might not know. It's like, what is it, like the number 3 or number 2 most viewed news site on the Internet?
We're right up there in terms of both American and international, because we have so many offices now around the world that we're doing really well with reader hits, and it's great that it's happening. And
yeah,
I knock on wood that they're letting me put these stories out there.
Up there with CNN and MSNBC and all of that good stuff. So so check them out, and we'll have links. And of course, you can find all of these stories, really every single one of the stories we talked about, also at openminds.tv. I want to also thank, as I do every week, Caleb Hanks. Have you guys met him? You guys, hopefully he comes to the Congress. He's a funny guy. He's Micah Hanks' brother. So talk about a power siblings there. Micah and Caleb, they're awesome. But Caleb Hanks does the open and close music. He posts this music for free on the Clerk Chronicles, and you can find a link to that on our radio page on openminds.tv. And I also want to thank you all. Go check out the UFO Congress, by the way. Lee and Martin will be there. Martin, I'm sure, will be doing lots of interviews, and Lee will be speaking. He will be on a panel, and he will be interviewing really one of the most important ufologists ever, Jacques Vallée.
I can't wait for that.
And yeah, I can't wait for that either. It's coming up soon.
So that's going to be good stuff.